Someone made money out of it, you know? And even later on, someone's made more money out of it, you know?
First time I met Big Paul, I was living in Diggs in Charlton-cum-Hardy, Bet and Tom Fannin, and I'm laying there slouching in the afternoon because you get lots of free time on your own, of course. And she said, "Oh, this is Paul McGrath," and I looked over my shoulder, and it's this 6'4" guy, big guy looking down on me, and then, "This is Paul McGrath," and I went, "He's from Dublin." I went, "Big man, it's bad enough being a Catholic, but being a black one's bang out of order." And since I said that, me and him have been best mates ever since. And that was a great introduction, and it broke the ice, of course. And we've not looked back.
We're in the pony thing at the bar, and there was 4 or 5 of the lads, Marty, Finn, and Sean Sheedy, and Paul slipped us Norman Whiteside's room key. He says, "Keep that," he says, "in case you don't get into the residence bar, go up to, later on, because I had to go off for a while, right? If you don't get in, I'll meet you back here in the room, come up the room." So they went into Annabelle's and went off somewhere else, and we all went up to Whiteside's room, and we were ordering drink on his room, and sandwiches up in the room, about 6 of us in the room. So then Paul arrived back, he says, "We're heading down to Leeson Street." There were the times you get a late drink, you had to go down for bottles of cheap plonk, or expensive cheap plonk down in Leeson Street. But John Young was in jeans and runners. So Paul says, Rob Norman's suit." So he opened the door, and he put on, John Young put on Norman Whiteside's suit and shoes, and off we went to Leeson Street, and we went into the club, and Whiteside's sitting at the bar. He says, "I have a suit like that." And John says, "I got mine in Louis Copeland. Where'd you get yours?"
He was unfortunate in one way, and fortunate in another, to kind of play and be company, to become friends with people like Brian Robson and Norman Whiteside, who were both gifted footballers in their own right, but both had a kind of as far as I could see, a wild streak in them, which tended to kind of fit into Paul's philosophy in life.
And I'll say about the drinking culture I mentioned about Robson and McGrath and myself. I mean, the reason we got the blunt of it is like Liverpool were winning everything at that particular time, and they were bigger drinkers than Manchester United, if you like. I won't name names, but there was lots of big drinkers at Liverpool.
There was this feeling at the time that the drinkers in Liverpool were every bit as bad. I mean, Atkinson used to joke that he'd tell Brian Robson not to fraternise with Terry McDermott because he was a bad influence on him.
Because they're winning the league every year, they don't get spoken about. Because we were not winning the league, then we are the culprits, and we're drinking too much, and that's the reason why we're not winning, etc., etc.
Paul made his first appearance for Ireland as a sub in the match against Italy, who were the reigning world champions from Spain the previous year. And he couldn't have asked for a more difficult, even though it was at Dalymount, and it was a huge crowd, an overflow crowd there. He came in for as a replacement early on for Mark Lawrenson.
When you mention Mark Lawrenson and Dave O'Leary, Kevin Moran, Mick McCarthy, there was some good centre halves around in those days. So I wasn't, much as I'd like to be like to have been in the team earlier. I look at those players and I say, well, how do you not play those footballers in your team anyway?
And rarely has the praise for an international debutant been justified in the long run. Like, people come on and they have good games and they shine for a while. In Paul's case, it was the start of one of the perhaps the greatest career in Irish football.
He ran players. He ran players out of position. He would dictate to the player, "You run over there." That was the player. He was the attacking player on the opposing team would come to him with the ball, and Paul would manoeuvre him in such a position out of the danger zone to the Irish camp, chase him out somewhere to the wings, brought him out, and then, if for instance he got the opportunity to tackle, then he tackled him, but always in a fair manner because his timing is so excellent.
I think the big fella's best position is centre back, because he reads the game so well. And he's found out a position. The one ability he did have was to get back as quick as possible, and he'd turn around. And I know he had long legs and he's a tall guy and all the rest of it, but if he ever was cut out, which, like I said, was very rare, he could just turn around and solve the situation. And people didn't. He made the game look so easy because he was always in the right position.
Centre half was his best position. He could play, and he could play right back. I remember for Ireland he played right back.
I have to say centre half, to be honest. You know, obviously I played a lot there in my Aston Villa days. You know, I've seen his positional sense. You know how good he was in the air, how he read a game, and just his all-round ability. I mean, the only thing that stopped Paul McGrath being the best centre half in the world for me was he didn't talk.
I think Paul could play, if he's so much talent, he could play it right back, he could play it left back, he could play it midfield. But I think if you're picking his best position, in my opinion, and it would be probably the easiest position for him to play, would be centre half in a back four.
And he just read it well, you know, and very aggressive in the air. You know, I can still hear the noise when he would come over the top of centre forwards with the big and as he headed the ball away. He was just phenomenal. And the 3 seasons I was at Villa, he was just a pleasure to play alongside. He was exceptional.
He played centre midfield for me. I mean, like I said, if I had a position which need filling, Paul would fill it. He could play anyway you wanted him to play. If you wanted him to play full, I mean, I've played him at full-back a few times as well.
Where you had Mick McCarthy and Kevin Moran, whom Jack thought they were the best in the world. And yet he had Paul McGrath, who would compare with him easily as a great centre-half. He would hold his own with any centre-half in the world.
The holding role in midfield, you know, in today's game, you know, he would be just awesome in that particular position, you know. But likewise as well, you'd look at a game now, centre-backs are so important. They're hard to come by now all of a sudden. And as I said to you, the holding midfield role would be very much suited to his game.
But Jack used him as a form, the opposite to what Brackenbear was with Germany. He was a sweeper in front of the back four. And this was something unusual, probably the first ever. In Germany, for instance, forever used the sweeping system behind the defence. Here Jack was sending a march on them, and he had a sweeper in front of the defence. With the result was teams were coming up against something new, something they'd never seen before.
Sometimes when you need to talk to a player and you need to tell him what you want, and Paul, you didn't need to. Paul was such a good player. He was good header of the ball. He was very, very quick. He was a very, very competitive player. And you never had to talk. You didn't need to talk to him that way. You didn't need to tell him what you wanted. He knew what you wanted. You were playing as somebody who knew exactly that you always looked at the team and you went, yeah, we've got him in the team. That's great.
Jack pulled me to one side early on and said, like, you know, we're going to use you in midfield and we're going to use you as basically a breakup player. You're going to be the kind of bully in midfield. When we want you to win the ball back, you're going to go into tackles, you're going to get the ball and you're going to give it to players like we had, like the likes of Ronnie Whelan. Earlier than that, there was Liam Brady. Kevin Sheedy was another player with a great left foot and he could use it.
Mick would always straight up and down centre half who did all the jobs that he was supposed to be done. He was good at, like, I would swap them over. Like, if we had a corner kick given against us, I would want Mick to be there at the back and Paul to be there at the front. And Mick was always very good. He liked that, to pick up that position, because that's a position where you get a little bit more time to go and jump and head a ball and to compete. Paul was there because if they played something short and that, he would have to go out and I can't remember anybody ever running through him and getting balls across. He was very, very quick, very quick. You didn't notice how quick he was. He was just. I mean, I'm a centre half, and I brought up. I wish I had his pace.
I think Paul was a great player. He was. I think first of all, he was a natural athlete, Paul. You know, he was very, very well balanced, and for a big lad, his balance was great. You know, he played like a little fella. You know, he was never caught off balance. And you saw the way he used to run, Paul. He had this low centre of gravity, but always well balanced, which is always a sign of a great player, or certainly something all great players have.
Paul could have played centre half in his sleep, and this is something that Jack picked up on very quickly, that Paul was in a comfort zone playing centre back, and we could see it. Like, he was still playing Premier League football at 37 at centre back. It was just something that was very, very easy to Paul, and I think Jack thought it was a terrible waste of his natural athleticism, because Paul had this physical strength, this physical power. Now you talk to Kevin Moran or Mick McCarthy, and they will tell you that the reason they became a successful combination is very simple, because they had Paul covering in front of them. So there was nobody ever got a run at Mick McCarthy or Kevin Moran when they were centre halves. And that was to me, the genius of Jack, that he created this role for Paul McGrath that you could only play if you had that absolutely enormous physical athleticism, that you could cover ground, that you could bully people. And Paul, you know, for such a placid guy off the pitch, could be in a huge bully on the pitch.
I used to love his presence. Like when I used to say, Paul, when we line up to kick off and you're looking at the centre, you're at the back, just move up to the edge of the circle and smile at the centre forward who's playing against you. Don't say anything to him, don't do anything with him, just smile at him. And he did. And I mean, I'm sure people used to think, oh, bloody hell.
And Jack used to always tell him, you know, when you're looking at an opponent before the game, just smile at them, because they'll be scared of you, the size of you.
Now, I'll ask you a question. Was he left or right-footed? You see, he was right-footed, by the way, but you very rarely could tell.
Again, as I said, the answer is that Paul could play anywhere, whether it was right side of midfield, left side of midfield, centre half. Paul was phenomenal. He used both feet equally well. He was good in the air, he'd pace. If you were to put down a list of attributes for a soccer player to make the top, Paul would be top of the list in every one of those attributes.
You had the excellence of Paul McGrath reading of a game, which was terribly important. Not alone could Paul tackle a player, but he could read the situations. Now his distribution of the ball was excellent also. So it was a marvellous ploy. We had two top centre defenders, Kevin and Mick, and here we had a man in front who was equal to them as a defensive player and certainly better than them as an attacking defender.
People will have different ideas on who were the prime motivators in Ireland's great years under Jack. Obviously, Charlton himself, as manager, had a huge input. But as players, you could ask 5 or 6 people who the best player of that period was, and they'd give you valid reasons why so-and-so should be or whatever. For me, I think Paul McGrath was the bedrock of Ireland's team in the golden years.
I had to pick 2 centre-backs. Paul would always be one of them. If I wanted a centre midfield player who could hold the position, Paul would be there. If I wanted an outside left or an outside right, and I was struggling to find one, I would always think of putting Paul there. I mean, that was the sort of player he was. He'd do anything you wanted, anywhere.
Forget about your Liam Brady's or Johnny Giles. Paul McGrath was the best there was.
As a footballer, I think McGrath was better than both Giles and Keane, purely and simply because he had the footballing ability, but he also had this enormous physical presence. And he played a role that I don't believe, that midfield role that Jack found for him, protecting the central two. I don't think there was another player in the world at the time that could have played that role as well as McGrath did.
I could have put Paul at left full-back, or right full-back, a centre-half, a centre-forward, or outside right, or outside left. No matter what position you put him in, he'd be a good player.
My knees first started giving me trouble when I was over on trial, actually, and we were playing against Sheffield United, I think it was, actually. And just one of the last tackles of the game, and I suddenly went into a clash with a guy, and I came out the worse for wear and cartilage trouble. And we were supposed to go to Vancouver at that stage, and even my coach Brian Whitehouse at that stage said to me, "Keep quiet, because you're going on the trip." And I was only over there 2 months at this stage. But I said to him, but I couldn't go because my knee had blown up to a terrible size. So that was the first problems I've had with my knees.
Alex Ferguson would describe Paul's athleticism as a kind of a musical athleticism, and he described one day in an early season game against West Ham, Paul had this lovely nonchalant way of backheeling a clearance. I've never seen any other defender do it, but I saw Paul do it loads and loads of times. But whatever he did, way he did it this particular day, he did his knee. And it was one of those early knee problems that led to a chronic succession of operations. He had 8 knee operations at United.
I've definitely had something like 5. I think it's 5 on my left knee, or is it 4 or 5 on my left knee anyway, and I think it's 7 on my right. So, it's quite a few.
And never had a knee operation once he left United, which is extraordinary. And it begs the question: was the treatment he was getting the right treatment at the time?
And Paul didn't join in that. Mick took him for a run wherever we were, and he would take him around the football ground. And although we trained for maybe an hour, Paul would only be jogging for an hour, which I thought was good, because it just kept his preparation for playing. He wasn't going to be tired or anything like that, because he was actually doing the work that he would do, but he was doing it over a period of time.
I remember just saying it to him, why are you drinking whiskey? Which Southern Comfort to me was whiskey, I mean, why are you drinking shots so quick? We've only had 2 or 3 points now, and you're on the shots already. I don't really like the thing. And he says, and he did. He said it. It loosens my tongue, makes me more comfortable around people. And he openly said it, and that was before he had a reputation as being a drinker,
We came from an Opel reception, and we pulled up to the Bagot Inn when Jack had partnership in the Bagot Inn. And we went into the Bagot Inn, and on the way in, Jack said to me, "You're in charge of him, keep your eye on him." So we followed the man around, and certainly he's done nothing wrong. And then I noticed this woman coming over with a big glass, as I thought, of Coke. And I went over to the barman. I said to the barman, "What did you put in that?" And he told me there was Coke and vodka. I said, "Well, you shouldn't have given it to her, because you'd given it to Paul McGrath." So I went over to Jack's son, who worked in the Bagot Inn at the time, John. I told John, I said, "Will you have a word with your man, tell him not to." So that's as much as Paul got that Pacific night. But on the way out, he stumbled getting onto the coach. And Jack said to me, "I thought I asked you to look after him." I said, "I did. He only had 1 sup for the night."
I used to go into the Wanderers bar after the matches, and when they were playing for Ireland, then it was a free bar, and he'd say, "Go up and get me 4 vodkas in a pint glass with Coke, and get a pint of Coke. And you keep the vodkas in one hand, and I'll take the Coke." And he'd look around, and he'd see where Jack was, and he'd go, "Now." And he'd just take the vodka out of the thing, take a big slurp, hand it back to me, and then 10 minutes later, Jack Charlton would come along, take the Coke out and taste it, and it'd be just Coke. And he'd say, "Oh, that's well done, big man," or something he'd say.
The 1988 European Championship finals were, for most people, the first big test of character, the first real test of strength for Jack Charlton's Ireland teams. And as we know, they came out of it with flying colours. And the star of that team, as in so many other occasions, was Paul McGrath. He was the player in the first game against England at Stuttgart. You remember it was a highly charged, I can rarely remember a game with so much hype before.
Well, I definitely thought we could have won that tournament. I honestly did. I thought our hardest game was going to be against the English, because it's simply for the fact that we knew each other's inside out so well.
Paul McGrath, for me, was the man of the match in Stuttgart, despite the fact that his bad knee, began playing up, I think, as early as the 10th, 15th minute.
Half time, I didn't know that Paul had an injury, it's just now that I found out, really, for the first time, and that's down to Paul. Paul wouldn't be someone that'd be going around putting his hand up in the change room saying, "By the way, lads, I've got a problem with an injury, I might have to come off."
Mick Bourne come over, called him aside, had a look at his knees, had a whisper in his ear, tried to convince him. After a long chat, consoled him and convinced him, as he did in the past with other players, and convinced him that, "Look, Paul, you have enough left in your legs to carry on."
He missed the second match against the Soviet Union, and people will forever ask, would we have beaten the Soviet Union had Paul been around instead of drawing 1-1?
And I've no doubt, had Paul McGrath been on that day, we would have won.
So then we had the Dutch game, and you know, we knew that was going to be the most difficult game we were going to play, and we decided, like, you know, look, here we are now. This is a make or break. We may as well go for it. And I thought we did reasonably well with them. You know, we battled hard. We knew we've got to keep them at bay as well, because they had their forward line was something fierce. We could have scored the first goal, of course. I think I clattered one off the post, and then John Aldridge tried to follow up and put the ball away. The Dutch, I don't think, knew where it was, and so they were unlucky to get away with that one.
I think that was our best opportunity of winning a major title.
Alex Ferguson came from Aberdeen, which was a small club. He did fantastically well, won the European Cup Winners' Cup with them, but he would say himself it was a much easier job. It was on a much smaller scale. The players were much easier to deal with. They weren't big fish in a small pond, and he went to United, and people forget the pressure that Alex Ferguson was under in those early stages at United. There was a lot of